Yeah, first, I didn't read Arnold Bertrand's article about Mao. It was very interesting. So thank you for letting me know.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
I just want to say a little bit about there's a lot of a confusion about the Cultural Revolution, I think. Now, Cultural
yes,
Revolution is it was a big mistake from Mao's perspective. But
yes,
over the years, I think I kind of understand why he did that. The West tend to portray this, he's just crazy and he just
yeah,
want to throw all the intellectuals into prison,
mm,
create all these chaos and hurting
mm,
people. I don't think that's how he wanted. I think at the time people needs to understand that he was facing a lot of challenges. That was
yeah,
the time both the Soviet and the US
that's right.
was against China. And the
Mm,
Nationalist Party, the Chiang Kai-shek, he left a lot of spies, covert operations, lots of things that is very unsettled, and they
yeah,
even conducted assassinations to
yeah,
high-level Chinese officials, and some of which were successful.
yeah,
They tried to assassinate Zhou Enlai, for example. Now they failed with that, but nonetheless, there were other people who were actually
yeah.
hurt or even being killed. So it is a very challenging time for him. So I think he got paranoid for that because there's so many challenges, there's so many danger everywhere.
Yes.
And so for him, it is important to have a clean kind of a operation within China to make sure that
Mm,
it's a safe environment. But
yes.
eventually, I think he lost control and it became chaotic. I think that's what happened.
He did lose control, and I was told by long ago by a Western journalist, a very left wing Western
Uh-huh.
journalist, who was there in Tiananmen Square
Mhm.
at one of the big rallies and was very close to Mao, that he got the sense that Mao was absolutely deeply, deeply upset by
Mhm.
the way in which things were getting out of control.
Yeah.
There's a few things I would say about this, which is
Mhm.
briefly a number of points. Firstly, the idea of Mao Zedong being an anti-intellectual is preposterous, given that Mao was
Mhm.
an intellectual himself to his absolute fingertips,
Mhm.
as you know much better than me. He was a poet. He
Mhm.
was a superb calligrapher. Even I
Yeah.
could see
Yeah.
how exceptional his calligraphy is. He was a man who knew Chinese history incredibly well. I mean, the idea that this man is somehow antagonistic to literature and culture and antagonistic to China's culture is absurd. And I know that there is a lot of criticism of him, and I know also that there's a lot of criticism of what's his name, Kang She or whatever his name
Uh-huh.
was, who was also an important figure then, and maybe justified in that case. But Kang She, for what it is worth, was also a very, very accomplished calligrapher.
Mhm.
And in the London art market, items of Kang's calligraphy fetch tens upon tens of thousands of pounds. So
Oh.
these people were not anti-intellectuals,
Mhm.
not by any conceivable
Mhm.
stretch of the imagination. I mean, that is an absurd thing. The second is that obviously there was immense pressure on China
Mhm.
and on Mao himself. And there's one thing which I think many people in China themselves don't know, but which is talked about in Russia quite a lot, which is that after the overthrow of Nikita Khrushchev,
Mhm.
Zhou Enlai came to Moscow, and there was expectations, there was hopes that this would lead to an improvement in relations
Mhm.
between the Soviet Union and China. And over the course of that meeting, the Soviet defense minister, who was a man called Marshal Malinovsky, came up to Zhou Enlai and said to him, and Zhou Enlai assumed that Malinovsky was talking on behalf of the entire Soviet leadership. He said, look, we've just overthrown
Mhm.
our own idiot who was Khrushchev.
Mhm.
Why don't you do the same thing to Mao? And Zhou Enlai said, under no
Mhm.
circumstances. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think that's what I'm about, if you think that this is what China's about, you have misunderstood us completely.
Mhm.
Anyway, Zhou Enlai reported this to Mao. Mao was, of course, extremely angry and very alarmed. He then messaged Moscow and he said, "What is this?" And was expecting that the Soviet leadership would repudiate Malinovsky or even sack him.
Mhm.
And they didn't.
Yeah.
So after that, Mao completely understandably assumed that they really were out to get him,
Mhm.
which probably many of them were. We also now know, by the way, that there was a faction within the Soviet leadership at that time, led by a man called Alexander Shelepin, who wanted to improve relations with China. He was a committed communist
Mhm.
and he wanted to reunite the communist movement. And he was secretary to the Central Committee, and he was in conflict with Brezhnev, who was
Mhm.
the Soviet leader at this time. And of course, he lost the power struggle, the internal power struggle in Moscow. But quite possibly, relations with China were affected by this internal power struggle. This has been talked a lot about in Moscow because the Russians, just to say this, blame themselves for the failure of the relationship with China in the 60s. I mean, it is well understood in Moscow today that they made a whole succession of catastrophic errors and that they treated China and Mao himself with extreme disrespect. And there is a very widespread view in Russia today that the single reason why the Soviet Union collapsed was precisely because of the split in the communist movement and the fact that the Soviet Union found itself in the 70s pitted against both China and the United States simultaneously, and this broke its resources.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say all of that because I
Mhm.
think it's worthwhile for people in China, those people who follow our programs, to be
Mhm.
aware of all of these things. And one of the things I would follow up from that and say is that precisely because there is a widespread opinion in Moscow that, as I said, ruining the relations with China was a catastrophic mistake for Russia, for the Soviet Union. There is a widespread consensus that that is a mistake that must never be made again. So that when people in China worry that the Russians might one day be tempted back into closer relations with the United States. Well, that is not what most people, including most important people in Russia, think today.
Yeah. It's just in general. I mean, all these things are
Mm,
not as simple as the
no,
West,
no,
right?
no,
The Western media portrays it. When
no,
they portray somebody good, then it's good. Somebody evil, then
no.
it's evil. There's
Yes,
nothing in between. But humans are
yes,
complex and many times
yes.
contradictory, right? So,
Absolutely,
so
absolutely. Anyway, did you see my comment on the
yes,
thread?
yes, that was very interesting. Yes, yeah,
Because I should tell you, I'm very, very interested in watches
yeah.
altogether. So,
Mm.
and I've always been interested in Chinese
Yeah, I didn't know
watches. So,
that either, until
yes,
you talked
yeah,
about that, and then I saw your comments.
yes,
Yeah, so
yes,
great, thank you. All right. So there's lots of phone calls, right? Okay, this week. So the Xi Jinping phone call to Trump. Now, the New York Times and other U.S. media reported that it's highly unusual that he called Trump.
yeah,
But the Chinese foreign minister's spokesperson, Mao Ning, she said the U.S. took the initiative.
yeah,
So here's what I think happened. Now, if you read the readouts by the Chinese foreign minister, it didn't say anything like by invitation or per request. Normally, they would do that if it
no,
is the U.S. initiative. But I think the U.S. Trump, it seems like they always want to talk to Xi Jinping for some reason, one reason
yeah,
or another.
mm,
So it is possible that they contacted China first and saying, is it time for
yeah,
the president to talk? And normally China would be slow on responding, like, okay, let's set up a time, an agenda, and then
mm,
maybe they even,
yeah,
alert the media ahead of time before their real phone call. But this time, Xi Jinping just basically said, okay, just dial the number then. So that's, I think, what happened. So Xi Jinping
Yes.
probably did make the phone call, but it is also possible that US did ask in
Yes.
advance to do so.
I
Nonetheless,
think.
nonetheless, I do think this time Xi Jinping or China is eager to talk to Trump.
Yes, I think all that is absolutely correct. And I should say something else. What you described is exactly what has happened with the last Putin Trump call,
Okay.
because the Americans told everybody that it was the Russians who initiated the call,
Mhm.
that it was Putin who called Trump. And then Lavrov said, that isn't true. It was the Americans who started the discussions. And in fact, we now have these leaks that have come out over the last couple of days. And we've discovered that one of them is a discussion between Witkoff and Ushakov, who's Putin's foreign policy aide. And talking about this future call that's going to happen between Putin and Trump.
Mhm.
It's absolutely clear that it was the Americans who first floated the idea of having a call. The Americans, Witkoff, then said to Ushakov, well, you've got to say this and that and the other because that's what the boss wants to hear. But it's clear that it was the Americans who've been pushing this thing. And I suspect something very similar happened with this call between Xi Jinping and Trump as well. That again, the Americans or somebody in the US first floated the idea, and the Chinese went along with it and picked it up. And then the Americans, just as they did with the Putin-Trump call, pretended that it was the Russians who called Trump. So they're doing the same with the Chinese, that it was the Chinese who called Trump. It's very, very much part of Trump's ego that he wants to be the person that people call, than being the person who himself does the calling. And you're absolutely right, though. It is he who wants to talk all the time to everybody.
Yeah. But it is clear this time that
Yeah.
Xi Jinping was interested, eager to talk. So that
Yes.
seems
Yes.
it
Yes.
is unusual in that sense.
Yes.
So now, of course, everybody expected that this phone call is about Taiwan.
Yeah.
Actually, it's about Japan. Commenting
Yes.
on Taiwan. But actually, based on the Chinese readout, he didn't name Japan by name.
No.
He emphasizes Taiwan issue, and he emphasized that here's something interesting. He said that
No.
Taiwan's return to China is an important component of the post-war international order. China and the United States fought side by side against the fascism and the militarism and should now work together to safeguard the achievements of the victory in World War II. So he bring it into a different level, it seems to me, not just
No.
limited to Taiwan issue, but this is the post-war order that you and we need to both safeguard. That's interesting, isn't it?
I find it most interesting. I find it the most interesting part of the whole conversation. And I'm not sure how it's read in China,
Mm-hmm.
but the way I would see it, and maybe I'm, drawing perhaps too much on the Russian way of seeing things here, because
Mm-hmm.
remember, I know much more about Russia than I do about China. But to me, it looks like Xi Jinping basically telling Trump, look, this country, Japan, which you consider to be your ally, I mean, they were the people we fought against together. They were the people who were involved in fascism and militarism and all of these things. And they are now going back to that. They're
Mm-hmm.
drifting back into those kind of sentiments and positions. And this is upsetting. It's calling into doubt our victory, our joint victory, which we fought for and struggled so hard together to achieve. So, given that these terrible ideas and these forces are getting strong in Japan again, surely we have more commonality with each other than you do with Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's how I would read it. But as I said, that's how the Russians would probably read comments like this. In China, I accept it might be a bit different. whatever way it was, I can tell you one thing: I doubt very much that Trump himself would have understood any hidden message there. And I don't know whether you saw his Truth Social post, but it was ridiculous. It was all about agriculture,
Soybeans.
soybeans, and all that kind of thing. I mean, it was just. I mean, it went completely over his head. Though the reports in the media do say that he did, in fact, call the Japanese Prime Minister and tell her to calm down and stop talking in quite such inflammatory way from this moment. But I mean, I doubt that he would have understood the strength of the message that Xi Jinping was trying to give.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's what Xi Jinping trying
Yeah,
to come
yeah,
across. And like you said, at least Trump understood that this is a serious matter, that it
yes,
bothers China tremendously. So it's good for him to make the call. Based on the readout from the Japanese Foreign Ministry, it doesn't sound like a very pleasant call because they didn't
yeah,
mention that they talk about Taiwan at all, which we all
yeah,
know that they did. So if
yes,
Trump said anything positive to support Takaichi's statement, they would have posted there, but they didn't.
yes,
So
no,
it seems
exactly.
to me that it wasn't that pleasant of a call. Um,
I'm sure that's right. I mean, I don't think the United States wants to get drawn into this
mhm,
conflict. I've discussed this extensively, by the way, on the Duran, and the
mhm.
point I've simply made is this: I mean, if China gets the sense that the United States is siding with Japan over this issue, in this kind of way, in effect undermining the joint victory in the Second World War, then China will start to take action. And
Yeah.
one of the things it might do, and I mean, this is my own guess, but I would be surprised if this wasn't at least a possibility, is that China would say, if the US is aligning itself with a Japan that is falling back into policies of militarism and fascism, then the last thing China is going to continue to do is to supply rare earths to the United
Mhm.
States to build up so that the United States can develop more weapons, which it will either sell to Japan or use in that alliance that it has with Japan. So, I mean, I think that the Americans need to understand that they are treading in on extremely dangerous territory now if they continue with this. As I said, I doubt that Trump has understood it fully, but I hope that there are other people in Washington who have.
One thing, both the U.S. administrations and the media, they really talk about the relevant legal documents for all these arguments. So
Mm,
uh, they think, okay, China wants to unify with Taiwan because China is a bully. China does want expansion. You know that it's I I think they totally missed the point. There is of course the historical cultural ties and all that,
yeah,
but there is also the when Xi Jinping talk about post-war world order,
yeah,
so he's talking about things like the Cairo Declaration. In the Cairo Declaration, which participated by the United States, United Kingdom, and China, uh, they made it very clear. They said that Japan must strip out all the islands in the Pacific it has seized or occupied since 1914. Okay, I think
yeah,
the put 1914 is when they took Korea. And then
yeah,
it says all territories Japan has taken from China, Manchuria, Formosa, Taiwan, must return to China. So you see, Taiwan even specifically named. It
exactly.
doesn't say Taiwan can be an independent country.
Mm,
It says it has to return. And consider how much sacrifice that China did for fighting the Japanese. If you
yes,
don't return Taiwan back to China, it's almost like unfinished. It's almost like not a full victory in the sense that it says clearly says that you have to return Taiwan to China, right? And then the Potsdam
yeah,
Declaration, the Article 8, even said that the terms of the Cairo Declaration shall be carried out, which means it codifies it. So what China is saying is that you, Japan, you have to follow this. So these are the declarations, or you can say even laws and rules that have been put there. You being a defeated nation, you need to follow all this. And the United States and China and all the other allies, we need to enforce this, right? So I don't think
yeah.
ever get mentioned, the mainstream media or Trump himself. I'm not sure he understands that.
No, you're absolutely correct. They never mention it. I mean, the knowledge of this level of history just does not exist in the West today. And I'll tell you something else. If you bring this all up to people, I mean, they won't be happy. I mean, I've experienced this myself so many times. I mean, you come up with these things that were said in the past, and these commitments that were made in the past, and people never really have an answer to what you say, but they become very, very angry when you do it. And anyway, there it is. But no, I don't think Trump understands that, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, it was always understood. It's always been understood by me that, I mean, Japan was expected to disgorge the gains of its aggressions, of its many aggressions. And if Japan is now coming back and saying, well, Taiwan should be independent in some way, then it is not doing that. I mean, it is going against that which it agreed when it surrendered unconditionally,
Yeah.
and which the Americans also agreed with China that it should agree to as part of its unconditional surrender. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Britain, because I'd forgotten that the British were also involved in all of this.
Yeah.
Again, I think some people in Britain need to be reminded of that. Just saying.
Yes, they should. Yeah. And I think now some people find it surprising that China reacted so strongly this time. But it is also true that even though in the past the Japanese society, the far right, the militarism, they always want to do something. But I do think it is highly unusual that he made it very clear that Taiwan something happens, that Japan would take military actions. I do think that
Well,
is a
I think that is unprecedented. I don't think Japan has ever said anything like that. Bear in mind that, again, according to the original terms of Japan's unconditional surrender and what happened after, Japan shouldn't even have armed forces.
no.
Its military still calls itself, was it the self-defense force or something of that kind? So, I mean, what the Japanese are now doing is that they're, in effect, saying that they will ally themselves to a secessionist faction in occupying a part of Chinese territory
Mhm.
and act in defense of that faction. Now, that isn't, that is a major escalatory step, which it would have been unthinkable for Japan to do
Mhm.
10, 15, 20 years ago. Unthinkable. I mean, I know, as I used to work with Japanese
Mhm.
companies, as you know.
Yeah, so what is dangerous is that they claim, including the United States, they claim, okay, the Taiwan should be independent and stuff like that. But then, let's say if Taiwan get to become independent, but Taiwan will not stop just being independent, Japan will try to get it. Japan will try to grab it. So that's where China really find that the whole Taiwan issue is existential for China because of that, because Japan is such a dangerous country in so many ways for China. So Japan cannot take more territory close to China, certainly not Taiwan. So I don't think people fully understand that in the West,
I don't
that
think people understand that.
how important this
I,
is.
I think that some people in Japan need to understand that as well.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, for Japan, of all countries, to insert itself into this situation with Taiwan, I mean, is so reckless and so misguided and so dangerous, by the way, for Japan. I mean, you say it's existential for China, it's
Mhm.
even more existential for Japan, given the enormous imbalance of power that now exists between China and Japan. That it is really truly shocking that a Japanese leader could be thinking in this way. I mean, a wise Japanese leader somebody who has the interests of Japan and of the Japanese people as their first priority would know that this is one issue that Japan should absolutely stay out of. I mean, this ought to be obvious. I mean, and again, once upon a time, I can remember a time when this would have been fully understood in Japan. Something very, very bad is happening in Japan, by the way, that all of this is being lost and forgotten today.
I think it partially is because the United States let the
Absolutely.
militarism to continue, or didn't suppress it hard enough, to let it continue to exist and even thrive in the Japanese society. So,
Well,
um,
it's even worse than that, because what the Americans have been doing, and again, you have to read all their various awful magazines that deal with military things and foreign policy things. The Americans are very aware that the military balance in the Asia Pacific region is turning against them. The Chinese military forces are growing in power, only growing in power because of actions the Americans themselves have been taking. So they have been agitating and pressuring Japan to take a harder line against China. And there's been open articles, which I've seen in the American media, saying that it's necessary to get the Japanese fleet to involve itself in the defense of Taiwan. And what the Americans have also been doing, and they have enormous influence in Japan, is that they've been supporting those Japanese politicians who will take a harder line against China, against those Japanese politicians who believe in protecting Japan and pursuing its actual national interests, which are to have at least a correct attitude towards China. Maybe not a friendly one, because that's asking a lot, but at least a correct one. And the result is that we've seen a steady radicalization under American influence in Japan take place over the last 15 years.
they did something similar, isn't it? That they let the neo-Nazi forces within Ukraine
Yeah,
to thrive as well. They just let it
yeah.
go without. I mean, you would think the neo-Nazis should never been tolerated in Europe, but whatever they're doing in Ukraine, it seems like the U.S. is, and the other European nations seems fine with that, right? It doesn't
Well,
seem wrong.
well, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely correct. But I mean, you could argue the same about Germany, by the way. I mean,
Mhm.
there was a German policy of Ostpolitik, reconciliation and rapprochement with Russia, which was popular, by the way, in Germany, amongst many people in Germany. But the United States never liked it and has consistently worked against it. And again, it has enormous influence in Germany. And the result is the German politicians who have been hostile to that policy of Ostpolitik and who have at the same time been most willing to reconsider, to take revisionist views about the Second World War and about the conflict between Germany and the Soviet Union. Anyway, those politicians have been encouraged by the United States to become stronger and to thrive. So it's exactly the same trend. But obviously, we're talking about Japan now. And yes, there are similarities and parallels. But what is happening with Japan is particularly dangerous because of the history and because of the fact that, unlike Germany, where at least there is still, as far as I can see, a vocal community of people who oppose this trend to militarization, I've never really got the sense that there is the same in Japan at the moment at all.
No, no, no. That's why it's so unsettling, for China.
Yeah.
So the other thing China did is the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations sent a letter to all 193 members, and
Yes.
also, of course, the General Secretary, Antonio.
Guterres, it's Antonio
Yeah, Antonio
Guterres.
Guterres. Yes. So the letter is emphasizing, actually bring people pay attention to UN Charter
Yeah.
Article 53, which says it allows regional organizations to take enforcement measures against an enemy state without a
Yes.
prior Security Council authorization. And it defines an enemy state as any state that was enemy of a UN charter signatory during World War II, which means, Japan, Germany, Italy, right? So those are the enemy states being
Yeah.
defined. What this Article 53 is basically saying, when they have any aggression, you
Yeah.
actually don't need UN security authorization to attack. So what
Interesting.
China's message is, here we have a very aggressive Japan, and if we do feel so threatened, we might take military action. Don't be surprised. That is fully based on the UN Charter. So I think that I mean, there's a lot of discussion within China about this. I don't think anybody's is saying that a
Yeah.
war is imminent with Japan, but I think
No.
what China is telling the whole world is that this is that serious. That's
I
the
agree, absolutely. I think it is extremely serious. I think it is far more serious than anybody in the West. Anybody in the West has really understood, because they don't take seriously. They just don't take seriously um, the history,
Mhm.
and they don't understand. They don't know the history and the feelings that, because of that history, exist in China. It reminds me very, very much, by the way, again, of the whole situation with Ukraine and
Mhm.
NATO eastward expansion and the radicalization of people in the Baltic states and the radicalization of people in Ukraine. And the Russians were warning again and again and again, look, this is intolerable, it's unacceptable, it cannot happen. If we continue to be pushed in this way, we will have to respond. Nobody took it seriously because
Yeah.
nobody believed it. And then, of course, the war began. And, well, we see how it turned out.
Trump does, like you said, in his social post, he cares deeply about the soybeans. So
Yeah.
I guess it is
Yeah.
important for his base, right?
Yeah.
And that probably explains that they did want to talk to Xi Jinping, because after the pause, the trade war pause, I think they expected China to immediately purchase a lot of soybeans, but China
Mm.
hasn't been. I mean, China
No.
started purchasing soybeans,
Yeah.
but not as quickly as much as Trump wanted, I think, right?
Well, that's absolutely right. But I mean, the trouble again, we come back to the US, because again, they are treating China. And like I said, AJP Taylor once said about Russia that they want to treat Russia like a tap that they can
Yeah.
turn on and off whenever they want. They want to do the same with China. So they want China to go and buy some more soybeans. But at the same time, I mean, they're not prepared to do serious things with China that might, respond to Chinese concerns, like beginning serious trade negotiations or
Mhm.
something of that kind. So this is very, very much the style, and not just of the US, but of the West in general. They never really seem to follow through on what they need. So I mean, they want the Chinese. They come to a deal. It's not even a deal properly, but they come to an understanding, and they think the Chinese are going to come along and buy lots and lots of soybeans in order to help Donald Trump. China has no particular need to help Donald Trump. What it wants is proper, strong, stable, long term trade agreements. Once that happens, the problem of soybeans will sort itself out.
Yeah, soybean, this kind of thing, soybean
Yeah,
doesn't just grow overnight, right? It needs a
no,
lot of planning. And you can't
yes,
afford to
mm,
have Trump change his mind one day and then the next
well,
day.
exactly.
So you just, in order to have a stable soybean trade, you do need to have some kind of guarantee in some sense,
Yeah,
right? So otherwise, why would anybody just commit to anything, right? So
well, well, exactly. I mean, what you basically want is something for nothing. I mean, it doesn't work like that.
yeah. And the other thing, so now that the US is considering to allow NVIDIA to sell H200 chips,
Yeah,
uh, I thought that they already agreed to that, but then they kind of backtrack and they don't. But now they want
yeah,
it again. But I think
Right.
the reason for that is Huawei's latest phone, Mate 80. Now people suspect that Huawei has its own 5 nanometers chips in there.
Yeah,
And
I'm
also
sure it does.
SMIC also seems like have produced
Yeah.
their own 5 nanometer chips. So
Yes.
when, when you watch what the US allows China to do, you can get a sense where China is, isn't it?
Well, that is exactly right. I'm going to say this. I mean, about, was it extreme ultraviolet lithography and all of that. China will have one of those machines in a year.
Yeah.
That's what I believe. I mean, if it perhaps it already has one,
Uh-huh.
because we
Yeah.
don't really know. But I mean, the idea that the Chinese cannot manufacture high end chips is absurd. I mean, these people are not living in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right. They're now going to go and try and get these chips, NVIDIA chips, sent off to China. The Chinese have already said we're not really interested in
Yeah.
these chips anyway. So why are you giving us those? By the way, there was a very interesting article in the Financial Times, very, very interesting article. Again, very reflective of Western thinking, but about Chinese economic and trade policy. It was a businessman, a writer for the Financial Times, goes to China, and he says, the fundamental problem with trading with China is that the Chinese make everything better and cheaper than we do. So that is somehow wrong and absolutely extremely unfair. So what China needs to do for its own interests is that it's got to somehow agree to buy more of our things, because otherwise we can't really trade with China fairly anymore. So what he's basically saying is that China, in its own interests, must buy less good and more expensive things from the West rather than produce them more cheaply and efficiently and better for itself. And I mean, I remember reading this article and saying to myself, what planet does this man live on? I mean, it's so completely ludicrous. But this is the story. I mean, China makes better chips than Nvidia designs, so we get the Chinese to buy Nvidia chips instead of their better Chinese ones.
Well, the trade, I mean, the trade war is still going on, like in
Of course it is.
Nexperia.
Of
So
course it is.
Nexperia is the latest one, is the Nexperia Dutch headquarters. They sent a letter to
Yeah.
Nexperia China and demanding that it resume production.
Yeah.
And they're saying there's still many companies that have shortage of chips.
Yeah.
So it seems like even though the Dutch government said they're going to temporarily suspend their efforts to control the company, which basically says they return the company back, but they hasn't, for example,
No.
restored the CEO.
No.
So are they trying to muddle it through, even though they said they are, give it back,
Yeah.
but they're not
Well,
really give it back, right?
it's exactly what they're doing. It's what they do all the time. They say they will give it back, and then they don't. They
Yeah.
want they want the chips, but they don't want to return to the position of returning the company to its owners. So they say they're going to do it, but they don't really mean it. There's no real good faith. There's no sincerity in what they say, and of course, this is very bad, because all it does is it damages trust even further. So the Chinese will say to themselves, "Why on earth should we waste our time even talking to these people when they talk, out of one side of their mouth,
Mhm.
but what the other side is saying or what they're really thinking is something completely different."
Yeah, and China brought this matter to EU. It seems like it
Yeah,
ignored the even the
yeah,
whole Dutch government. It seems like
yeah,
so we will see,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it does seems I don't like this
I,
trend.
what I no what I think is actually going to happen. I think it's going to be very interesting, because I saw what the Chinese Commerce Ministry did a few weeks ago, was that they said, look, anybody who's short of chips, they should get in touch with us.
Yeah.
Forget about the Dutch government. Forget about the management of Nexperia, Netherlands. Forget about the EU. Talk to us.
Hmm.
And I think quietly, probably a lot of businesses are doing it.
Yeah.
In other words, you cut out these institutions entirely.
Yeah. The way that the Netherlands are doing right now, I do feel they're kind of like a self-destructive the thing they're doing. I
Yes.
don't quite get it. The same thing with ASML. So another thing happened is ASML, they They sold a lot of lithography machines to China, but now they stopped serving those machines, including spare
Oh,
parts.
really?
Yeah. And so now China demanded that the ASML buy all these lithography machines back because if they're broken, you can't use them. Because what they're doing is this is a breach of contract. The contract always says you have obligations to serve those machines, but they stopped doing that. I think it's because the U.S. asked them, or whatever reason, they stopped doing that. So the China said you have to buy them back, and if you don't, China will stop recognizing all the patent. There's a lot of patent for, and they're going to reverse engineering or something. So that's another thing that is going on, the spat between the Netherlands and
I had no idea about this. There's been no reporting of this in the media
China.
here. I think this is a very, very big thing indeed. I mean, that ASML is now refusing to provide
Mhm.
servicing and repair for the machines in China is incredible. And I wonder what the justification for taking that extraordinary step actually is. I mean, that is incredibly escalatory and incredibly aggressive, and as you absolutely rightly say, a blatant breach of contract.
Mhm.
So clearly, sanctions are being applied, and they're being expanded continuously and all the time. And before very long, China will indeed take countermeasures.
Yeah.
This isn't the Netherlands. This is the United States. I
Mhm.
mean, Trump meets with Xi. They do a kind of deal. They promised to do various things. They wrote back on some of the things they've done, but you see that they've come back and are doing others. By the way, you remember we talked about
Yeah.
a study in the Rand Corporation that the Rand
Mhm.
Corporation published about 2 weeks ago about the US should, instead of being an adversary to China, seek to have better relations with it. That article has been taken down.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. They don't want to hear that, huh?
no, no, no. Obviously, some people were very unhappy about it,
Okay.
and the hardliners have won again.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't even talk about that. That's pretty incredible.
No,
Okay.
yeah, no, absolutely. But what is happening with ASML is even more incredible,
Mhm.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And frankly, I hope we do get into a situation where China just takes apart these machines and reverse engineers them because it
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the idea that China cannot make mirrors. Everybody always talks about mirrors. That only Carl Zeiss in Germany has the
Mhm.
skills to make really good mirrors. I mean, they still think that Chinese people are peasants living in the 13th century. That they can imitate, but they can't do, and of course they cannot reproduce the high technology things that we in the West can do. I mean, as you said it yourself. The racism here is
Yeah. Yes.
off
Yeah.
the scale,
Uh-huh.
actually. But this denying of servicing to the ASML machines
Mhm.
is an incredibly aggressive move. And again, it's striking that, as I said, no one in the media has mentioned it. When did it start, by the way?
They had stopped serving it for the past, I think, a couple months, something.
Okay,
When
interesting.
first they
Okay,
threatened that they said that they're going to stop serving it, and I guess giving China the opportunity to buy some parts or something. I don't know. They didn't act on
okay,
upon it, immediately.
okay, okay.
China even didn't think it will, get to that point,
No,
but they eventually did that. I think they talked a
wow.
little bit about how to resolve it or something, and they couldn't figure out. I mean, fundamentally, the Dutch government doesn't really want to resolve it. I think that's
No, of
the
course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. By the way, anybody who knows anything about the Netherlands, I mean, I know the Netherlands very well. I've been there. I used to go a lot as a student. None of this in any way surprises me. I
Mhm.
mean, the Netherlands is little England, and many of the attitudes that you find in England are reproduced in the Netherlands. Remember, the Netherlands is a massive colonial power,
Yeah,
and a lot of the mindset has never gone away.
yeah. Even though it's a small country, but here's
It's a
something I
small
find.
country. It's a
Yes,
small country
country.
that depends on its exports of precision machinery.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
it's a major producer of precision machinery and of machine tools and things of that kind. For the Netherlands to put all that in jeopardy it's very very dangerous in terms of its own long term economic future. But the Dutch are very very pro American. They're
Hmm.
intensely pro American. That I always remember, and
Well,
they're axiomatically the kind of people who would act like this.
well, China is Japan's largest trading partner. So
I
for
know.
yeah, so for Japan, you need to think about your own best
I
interest,
know.
right? You would
I
think
know.
that they would,
I
but
know.
obviously they don't. So, um,
Yeah.
and then there's, I just find it's fascinating. Sometimes, many times, maybe the small country, they are troublemakers.
Yes, they
So,
are. Yeah.
like Estonia recently, I think their foreign
Yeah.
minister visited China, and during the trip or shortly after, there was an article called "The Formidable Estonia had issued an ultimatum to China: either we or Russia." I mean, isn't that laughable that they would think China would choose Estonia over Russia? Are
I
they
know. It's
serious?
quite. Well, I'm sure that Wang Yi and Xi Jinping and Li Qiang are trembling in their shoes after receiving this ultimatum from Estonia. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, these people are off there. I mean, they have no, they're completely disconnected from reality. I mean, and if you have to deal with the Baltic states on a regular basis, you would know how delusional they are about themselves. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's like little dogs. You know, Chihuahuas are always much more
Mhm.
aggressive
Yeah.
than St. Bernards. I mean, it's that. It's like that.
Yeah, Lithuania is another one when you're talking about the Baltic
Yes, and
states, right? Lithuania,
yes,
they remember they upset China for allowing Taiwan to
no,
put up to change their name from
yes,
Taipei office into Taiwan office or something. Minor issue that really doesn't mean much, but they upset China. And now I think the Lithuania government, maybe there's a new one, they have the second thoughts that they really want to improve the
yeah,
relationship with China. But instead of correct their mistake, which is a simple one, just tell whatever the office tell them to correct the name, they don't, and they still send out a proposal. I think early this year, and then saying something like, this is our proposal, and that's you need to take it seriously or something. And China didn't even answer, didn't even bother, and
no,
now they got
no,
very agitated. So now they have follow up, like almost like an ultimatum as well, just like Estonia.
no.
It's it's so incredible.
It is.
In,
It is. It is incredible. Yeah.
in China, people call these Baltic three. They call them the three Baltic dummies.
Yeah.
And
Well, they're
there's a
right to. Yeah, they're right to. I mean, I would say that they have managed to poison the atmosphere in Europe a great deal. I mean, their hysteria and their Russophobia and their xenophobia is
Mhm.
now contaminating the whole entire European culture and
Mhm.
discourse on international relations. For you to know, by the way, in Russia, they've recently started calling Germany Greater Estonia.
But do you think that these small countries, including the Dutch, I mean, all these small countries, European countries, is because they are in NATO, they're in EU, so
Yes,
that's why
yes,
they're like a
yes,
chihuahua barking
yes.
everywhere.
Exactly,
Oh,
exactly. I mean, they think that they have the power of the United States behind them,
okay,
and they
okay.
want to use that in order to assert themselves. So they think that by taking these incredibly provocative line against a country like China, that will make their friends in America happy. And at the same time, they also feel that by being as rude and as aggressive to China as they are,
Hmm.
they can get away with it because the Americans are supporting them. So
Yes.
they're wrong on every conceivable count. I mean, this is uh, um, unwise to an extreme, but I'm afraid it's how these infantile leaders of these little countries have come to think.
Okay, let's talk about those phone calls because, like I said,
Yeah,
there are a lot of phone calls.
yeah,
The phone calls between Vitkov and Ushakov, right? And
yeah,
then there's also a Ushakov and a phone call between Ushakov and the Russian.
yeah.
I think is
Dmitriev, yeah,
Dmitriev. He's the economic
yeah.
advisor, right, for
That's right. That's
Putin.
right.
So, what do you make of these phone call? They're leaks, right? They
Leaks.
got leaked what they were
Yes.
talking about.
Well, the contents of the phone calls themselves are completely uninteresting
Mhm.
and completely innocuous. I mean, there is nothing there that I would take, frankly, as being at all concerning. I would make one point. Ushakov himself has a background as a diplomat. He's a very, very experienced Russian diplomat. He
Mhm.
was formerly ambassador to Washington. I mean, so
Okay.
that tells you how senior he was. Neither Witkoff nor Dmitriev have any kind of diplomatic background. So you would expect that they would say things in a more loose way
Mhm.
than professional diplomats might do. But even allowing for that, there's really nothing here that should really cause anybody any embarrassment and any trouble. There's two things to say about this. Firstly, clearly there is surveillance going on. I mean, the United States is uh, listening in to these conversations. It's listening in to the conversations that Witkoff, who is the authorized representative of the President of the United States, is having with the representative of a foreign power, and which is a conversation that is about the conduct of the diplomacy of the President of the United States and therefore of the United States. So somebody is listening into these calls, and that's already a hostile thing.
Mhm.
And then, of course, they publish
Yeah.
extracts of these calls. Now, the first thing to say is that this is an extremely serious criminal offense. I've obtained legal advice about this, including from American lawyers, one of whom is Robert Barnes, and we
Mhm.
asked him about this on our live stream, and he confirmed it. This is an extremely serious criminal offense. These are clearly classified calls, and nonetheless, leaking is taking place. So, on the one hand, you are conducting surveillance on the president's officials, and secondly, you are leaking the content of diplomatic telephone calls. I mean, this is as bad as it gets. And it tells you that there is a major power struggle underway in Washington. And it reminds me, I have to say, of the early months of the Russiagate scandal, when again we were getting lots and lots of leaks, including leaks of telephone conversations, one of which between Michael Flynn and the Russian ambassador at that time, Sergei Kislyak, clearly a classified call, and yet, as I said, its contents were leaked, and all in order to press forward with, um, you know, power struggles, destabilize the president's attempt to conduct foreign policy.
So they're not happy with Trump is trying to uh, make a peace deal. They're trying to
Yeah.
undermine that. Is that the
Yeah,
purpose of
that
leaking
that
from
that's
the
ex-
Stockholm?
that's exactly the purpose of this. What they're
Yeah.
trying to do, what they were trying to imply here, is that the proposals that we've been seeing coming out of Washington
Mhm.
are not really American proposals at all. That
Mhm.
Dmitriev and Ushakov have been dictating these proposals to Witkoff, who
Mhm.
has then been basically writing them, so that Witkoff is essentially a traitor acting on Russia's behalf, and by
Mhm.
implication, so is Trump. Now, that is ridiculous, and that's not what these calls actually show, but
Mhm.
that's the spin that's been given. So they're trying to undermine the entire process of negotiations, which is underway.
So regarding the negotiation, so there was the 28 points, and then there's a
Mm,
19 points. So
yeah.
where are we right now?
Well, where indeed, because the Russians are very, very skeptical about this whole process.
Mhm.
Putin gave a very powerful press conference yesterday, By the way, he's due to meet Wang Yi. Wang Yi's headed
That's right.
to
Uh-huh.
Moscow.
Hmm.
Exactly. So,
Hmm.
so the Russians are going to be talking to their friends as well as their enemies, if I can put it like that. But what the Russians have said is that we came to an understanding with Trump in Alaska. The Americans, as we now know, there was no actual agreements made in Alaska,
Hmm.
except that the Americans would set out, codify certain issues that they'd arranged as talking points. And the Russians were waiting for the Americans to do that so that a serious process of negotiations between the United States and Russia could begin. Uh, we never got there,
Hmm.
and I'm starting to think that we never will, because the Americans are clearly not united about this, which is why we're getting these leaks, and the Europeans are opposed, and the proposals that the talking points are changing all the time, and they're increasingly moving away from what the Russians are prepared to talk about.
So what's happened next then?
Well, what happens next? There's going to be a meeting. Witkoff is going to come to Moscow next week.
Okay.
We'll see if something can be cobbled together. But if it isn't, it'll all fall apart. Everybody can see that the Russian army now is advancing fast
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
Ukraine and that Ukraine is losing the war. Everybody except the Ukrainians and their European friends, I should say. So
Hmm.
the talks will collapse. And given the situation in Ukraine, there will be massive pressure in Washington and from Europe for further escalation against Russia. More sanctions, more missiles, all of that kind of thing. All of the things that have failed already, but they'll try and do them again. That it seems to me is the most likely development here.
So it will still be determined, more or less determined in the battleground.
Yes, I
Okay.
think so.
Hmm.
I think so. I mean, the Russians. By the way, Putin made a very interesting statement a couple of days ago, in which he said, "Look, we came to these understandings with the Americans in Alaska, and one of the reasons we did that is because our friends want us to. They
Uh-huh. Good.
want to see
Hmm.
us trying to work towards
Hmm.
a diplomatic negotiated course. If it was just us, we might not be doing this, but China wants us to, India wants us to, Brazil wants us to, and we're not going to go against our friends. We're not going to go against the wishes of our friends. But he also went on to say, if we can't move forward, well, then we will continue the war, and we will do so until we win.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay, the Middle East. Now,
Mm,
MBS recently visited the White House, right?
mm.
So they again talk about the Abraham Accords. Now, exactly what does Abraham Accords do?
Yeah.
Trump tries to, he pushes very hard on the Abraham Accords. Why does he do that? Why does he want to do that?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I should say, first of all, that, I mean, all of the external pomp and circumstance around that visit has apparently concealed the fact that the visit itself didn't go very well.
Okay.
MBS apparently was not receptive, not just over the Abraham Accords, but to many other things that the Americans
Hmm.
wanted him to do, including in relation to oil prices, just to say
Okay.
this.
Mhm.
But the Abraham Accords were basically a series of agreements that were negotiated during Trump's first term, whereby certain Arab states in the Gulf established diplomatic relations with Israel. And it's all part of a big attempt that Trump and his team have been making to basically normalize Israel,
Okay.
to
Mhm.
get Israel accepted in the Middle East as a respectable country, a respected and respectable country that's part of the whole Middle East setup, and to end, in effect, the sense of an Arab-Israeli conflict, and to marginalize the Palestinian part of the conflict. Now, The Arab countries that have agreed to establish diplomatic relations with Israel are relatively small, places like the UAE, for example. The big one is Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really say that the process of normalizing Israel's status in the Middle East has been fully achieved until and unless you get Saudi Arabia to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. But Saudi Arabia is, of course, a religious monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
It is the country where Mecca and Medina, the two big
Mm-hmm.
religious centers, are located. The official title of the King of Saudi Arabia is the guardian or custodian of the two holy mosques,
Mm-hmm.
Mecca and Medina. What MBS said to Trump is, we cannot do this. A feeling in Saudi Arabia is too strong against us doing this. We have to see first some actual movement towards establishing a Palestinian state.
Mm-hmm.
Unless that happens, we cannot take this step that you want us to do. And the Americans apparently were very disappointed.
Why does Trump find this surprising, consider what just happened, right? And still probably going on in
Yeah,
Gaza. I mean, MBS, I thought I read somewhere he even said that he personally probably okay with it, but he knows his people are very much against Israel right now.
exactly,
So how
exactly.
come Trump doesn't understand that?
Well, you've discussed this many times. I mean, American racism at the end of
Yeah,
the day. I mean, they don't take the Palestinians very seriously. They don't take the feelings of the Arabs very seriously.
yeah.
They imagine that everybody can be either bullied or bought into doing what America wants. It suits America, or at least it suits this particular group of people who are leading America, to get the Arab states to have good relations with Israel. So they think they can bully and buy these countries into doing that. And then when they discover that these countries can't do it, they're angry and they're surprised. And well, we'll see what happens next.
Well, I feel like even the United States, they are growing anger towards Israel, towards the
Yes,
fact that Israel has so
yes,
much impact, so much
yes,
influence on the United
yes,
States, right? So the
yes,
latest
yes.
one is X, that put into this feature that from the IP you can see the location, right? And then it turns out that the U.S. agencies, multiple of them, but including like the Department of Defense, Department of War now, Homeland Security, their location is in Tel Aviv. And so people are saying, are we an occupied nation now?
Yeah.
By the way, this feature, it's existed on all the Chinese social media for a long time. So when you go to anywhere,
No, it isn't.
you don't need to click on anything. In China, it's all the social media beside your name or your account name. There's immediate a location mark there.
Yeah.
So it seems like Elon Musk think that's a good idea. Elon Musk knows a lot about the Chinese. You
Yes, he
know,
does. He
yeah, his
does.
mother visit China frequently, and
Yeah.
so whatever.
Mm.
I do think that he's the one who noticed that okay, this is a feature that in Chinese social media, so he's introduced that in X. But
Yes.
nonetheless, the fact that Homeland Security was managed, at least managed, I guess, in
Yeah.
Tel Aviv. Now they changed that now, but nonetheless, it's pretty remarkable to think about it,
Yes.
that they are managing Israel is managing the Homeland Security executive.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, absolutely. And of course, by the way, it also turns out that many of the commentators that operate in the media space on Israel's behalf are
Yeah.
located in India,
Mhm.
which is also very remarkable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's all extraordinary. But no, you're absolutely correct. There has undoubtedly been a major swing against Israel on the part of the wider American public, but it has not yet affected the attitudes of the American political class.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
They are still as loyal and as tied in to Israel as always.
Hmm.
So, in 10 years' time, we might see a
Right.
shift. But for the moment, the US remains as committed to Israel as always.
Yeah. Okay, the Epstein file. I mean, it's the never-ending Epstein file.
Yeah.
So the FBI now, it has been multiple reports that they are supposedly frantically trying to redact names on the Epstein file. My question is, do you think Trump will really redact all the Republicans and just leave out the Democrat? Wouldn't that be too obvious?
Well, you would have thought so. But nothing would surprise me about this any longer. The
Mhm.
Epstein files are going to be a rumbling problem, a festering problem in the United States for
Mhm.
years and years and years. So um, the political class is deeply embarrassed about this
Yeah.
affair.
Mhm.
The problem it has is that the American working class is very angry about this affair, and so you have the unstoppable force up against the immovable obstacle. So it's going to be an enormous battle. What's going to happen? This is my own view: is that more and more of these files are going to be quietly destroyed.
Well, even even so, there is still a lot already out there. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of names out there, and we pretty
Mm.
much know what happened, right? So
Yes.
it's just that there is no official account and there is no
No.
accountability. Okay, so that's,
Yes.
I think, the biggest problem is we
Yes.
know what they did, but
Yes.
nothing happens to these people.
Yes,
So I
yes,
think that's,
absolutely agreed.
yeah.
Absolutely agree.
I have a question here. Now, remember when Obama was running, he made a lot of promises, and then the moment he got into the office, he just become everybody, just any other politician, even though when he was campaigning, he sounded
Yeah,
so different. And the same
yeah,
thing with Trump. And Trump also made a lot of
mm,
promises like drain this swamp, and then now he's 180
mm,
about this such an important issue for a lot of
mm,
people to release the Epstein file and be honest about that. Do you think people like Obama, like Trump, when they were campaigning, that they were intentionally deceiving the voters, or when they were campaigning, they were serious, they really want to do something, including some serious reforms, but once they got into the office, they quickly realized it's too hard of a job, too much resistance, so they just fold into the existing system.
I think in Obama's case, he was cynical and
Okay.
deceiving people all along because he flipped almost immediately. I mean,
Mhm.
it took so little time from him to go from one side to the other
Yeah.
that I cannot for one moment believe that he was ever really sincere about some of the things that he was saying when on campaign. But in Trump's case, I do think it's more complicated. I'm sorry. I think Trump is a very complicated man altogether and a very insecure one. He is part of the American oligarchy. He's
Mhm.
a billionaire by inheritance, by the way, but also through his business contacts and all of that. But he's a member of the American ruling class. He is. He has all these connections and all of these friends within the donor community. At the same time, he was outside, he functioned for most of his life outside the political system. He's never
Mhm.
held elected office before he stood for president of the United States. So, and he's somebody who has gone out and spoken to people around the country. He goes on campaign and he does this. So I think that he's divided.
Mhm.
At some levels, he wants to do these changes, and perhaps underestimates how difficult it is to do these changes. But at the same time, he doesn't want to make changes that are so radical
Mhm.
that they would undermine the whole position of the class, the ruling class, to which he himself belongs. So there is this tension within
Mhm.
Trump.
Mhm.
But with every month that passes, it is the ruling class, Trump,
Mhm.
who is going to
Yeah.
win out over the more democratic Trump, if I can put it like that.
I just feel like there's a yearning from the American
Yeah,
public for
yeah,
reform. I mean, it's actually,
yeah.
I would say as early as when Bill Clinton was running, right? That he
Yeah,
come from Arkansas, an outsider, being
that's
regarded
right.
an outsider compared to Bush Senior, that he's
Yeah,
young and different and, lots of hope
yeah,
and stuff like that. But of course, it turned out to be a disappointment. And then even like a W, he portrayed himself also like a different type of politician. He would
yeah,
say, this is, I mean, the media would portray him like somebody, oh, you can just have a beer with. So he's not as stiff as traditional, out of touch kind of guy.
yeah,
And of course, he is a disappointment.
yeah,
And by the time Obama came, I think people would desperately wanted
yes,
somebody truly
yes,
different. But they
yes,
just again and again, they just get
yes,
disappointed, right? It's
yes,
so
yes.
frustrating.
Well, yes,
So,
it is extremely frustrating, and I mean, it tells you something about the real nature of politics in the United States.
uh,
That what does the Constitution say? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect. It
yeah.
implies that it's the people who are the power in the United States. Well, we see that the reality is very
Mhm.
different, and it is frustrating,
Yeah.
and it is creating a degree of dissonance and dysfunction, because on the one hand the United States promotes both to the world and to itself this image of itself as a democracy,
Hmm.
except that it isn't one.
No.
And countries that are so dissonant, so discordant,
Hmm.
become dysfunctional, and eventually they do break down.
Yeah. And there is a series, the New York Times ran a series of 5 parts about China. And I thought it would be, they would do some in-depth analysis or something. But again, it's a disappointment because as I read it through, they don't seem to quite understand China because they still saying it was a mistake for them to assume once China introduced to market economy, capitalist elements, China will be more like the West. But it turns out that that's not the case. But they never analyzed why is that the case? Why China didn't turn to the Western style democracy, right? Because it has problems.
Well, it is enormous problem. You're absolutely correct. I mean, they're blind to their own problems. They're also blind to China. Actually, I mean, the idea that China, which is the world's oldest country and the oldest continuous civilization, which is just point to make here,
Mhm.
is going to somehow dash off and say, oh my God, what do we need to do? We need to stop being China and become America.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous, actually. I mean, I never. I mean, here again, I would say this. Maybe this is because it's the Greek part of me. I never imagined that for one moment.
Yeah, but there is a lot of people in the West that they
Yeah,
did. I think
yeah,
also part of it, they want to see, like, for example, elections in China, because I think deep down, they think in elections is easy for them to control. They can get
yes,
into the
absolutely.
elections to manipulate, right? To get to the people that they like, they want, they can easily control
Well, of
to
course,
run country.
that's exactly
Yeah,
what they want. I mean, they absolutely believe that. That is exactly
yeah.
what they think.
Yeah, and they never admit that. They
No, of
said,
course not.
"Oh, we make a mistake to believe that," but China never, introduced our style of democracy. Well,
Yes,
because
yes.
you want to control
Well,
China.
well, they never ask themselves another even more fundamental question: is what do the Chinese themselves think?
Yes,
What's
yeah,
what
yeah,
system would they prefer? It
yeah,
might not be the Western system. Of
yeah,
course, that is unthinkable in the United States.
yeah. It's still unthinkable, even after, so many.
After all that's happened, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I would think by now they should have some soul searching,
yeah,
in depth analysis
yeah,
and trying.
yeah.
They don't seem interested in that.
Oh
So,
no, of course not. Of course not. America, searching analysis, impossible.
okay. All right. Let's talk again
We
next
did
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
I'm here. All
Okay.
is well. We can speak then. Thank
Bye.
you very much, Sophia. Bye.